I sacrificed so much for you. I deserve half of your fortune.
She walked into the courtroom demanding half of the company he had built from nothing, but she didn't expect the judge to uncover the truth about her lies. Michael Reynolds sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped so tightly the veins stood out against his skin. Across the aisle, Samantha made her entrance like she owned the place, heels striking the polished floor in sharp, confident clicks. She wore white, as if to play the innocent, her diamond earrings catching the light with every turn of her head. Reporters whispered from the back row. Everyone knew the story by now. The self-made entrepreneur, dragged into divorce court by the woman who once called herself his biggest supporter. Michael's lawyer leaned in. "Stay calm. Let her talk first." He nodded, but his jaw tightened. Calm was never his strong suit, not when everything he had worked for, every sleepless night, every deal closed over black coffee and empty pockets, was suddenly being claimed by someone who had never lifted a finger for it. Samantha adjusted her blazer and glanced over at him, lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she whispered something to her attorney, who gave a small nod. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. "All rise." Judge Bear walked in, expression unreadable. She was known for being blunt, the kind of judge who didn't waste time on theatrics. "Case number 245, Reynolds versus Reynolds," the clerk read aloud. Michael kept his eyes forward. But inside, the memories flooded. The dingy basement office, where he'd started the company with a second-hand desk and a laptop that overheated if he pushed it too hard. The endless ramen dinners, the months when rent was late because every dime went back into the business. Samantha hadn't been there for that. She had walked in later, when contracts were already signed and profits finally steady. Now she wanted half. Judge Barrett looked first at Samantha. "Mrs. Reynolds, state your claim." Samantha stood, shoulders squared, voice dripping with rehearsed conviction. "Your Honor, this business grew during our marriage. I was by his side through it all. I deserve 50%. Michael's head snapped up. Her tone was smooth, polished, almost convincing. He could see the jury of onlookers shifting, some nodding as if they believed her. His lawyer's hand rested lightly on his arm. "Don't react. We'll get our turn." But Michael's mind was already racing. He knew the truth. She hadn't invested a dime. She hadn't worked a single shift. She had spent money-lavish trips, designer bags, champagne brunches, but she had never once sat across from an investor or signed a contract. Samantha smiled as she took her seat, leaning back with the ease of someone certain she had already won. Judge Barrett's gaze swept the room. "Very well. We'll examine the evidence." Michael exhaled slowly. Evidence. That was the one thing Samantha didn't have, and the one thing he had in spades. Still, as the first exhibits were called forward, a question lingered in the air like smoke before a fire. Whose story would the judge believe? The first time Michael heard her demand, it didn't come from her lips. It came from the news. "Local entrepreneur's ex-wife seeks 50% of Reynolds Analytics," the anchor read, her voice cool and practiced. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "A divorce worth millions." Michael muted the TV. "Yo!" He didn't need commentary. He knew where it came from. Samantha's attorney, feeding sound bites to reporters, spinning her story as though she had been building the company beside him all along. That night, his phone buzzed nonstop. Old friends, business contacts, even his sister in Chicago. "Is it true?" one message asked. "She can't do that, right?" another wrote. Michael answered none of them. He set the phone face down and stared at the documents spread across his desk. Articles of incorporation, tax records, payroll reports. His name on every page, hers on none. But silence wasn't enough. The next morning, over bitter diner coffee, his lawyer pushed a folder toward him. "She's going for everything, Mike. Half the business plus spousal support. She's painting herself as the backbone of the operation." Michael didn't look up. He traced the rim of his mug with his thumb. "She never even worked there." "I know," the lawyer said. "But in family court, words can sound louder than facts if you let them." Michael finally raised his eyes. "So we don't let them." "Stop." It wasn't bravado. It was resignation. He'd worked too long, risked too much to watch Samantha rewrite history for a payout. By the weekend, the story had spread beyond local news. An online blog ran with the headline, "The woman behind the man? Did she build Reynolds Analytics too?" Comment sections filled with strangers arguing about who deserved what. "She was his wife, of course she helped. She's a gold digger. Bet she never saw a balance sheet in her life." Michael read a few, then closed the browser. Public opinion didn't matter. The courtroom would. When a reporter cornered him outside his office, shoving a microphone in his face, Michael kept his voice even. "Mr. Reynolds, any comment on your ex-wife's claim?" He paused, long enough for the cameras to lean closer. Then he said, "I'll let the judge decide." It was the only sentence he spoke on record, but it was enough to shift the tone. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't just Samantha's. She expected him to fold, to negotiate quietly, to buy her silence with a settlement. Instead, he chose daylight. Court filings show Reynolds is contesting his ex-wife's claims, the paper reported. He insists the company was his alone from the start. Inside his office, Michael studied the photo they used. Him walking into the courthouse jaw tight, eyes forward. To strangers, he looked like a man under siege, but the truth was simpler. He was tired of being silent. When Samantha saw the headline, she sent him a text. "You're making this ugly. We don't need to go to court. Just agree to my share, and this ends clean." Michael stared at the screen, then typed a single reply. "See you in court." Her plan to scare him into surrender had twisted on itself. Instead of a private payout, she had invited a public fight, and Michael had nothing to hide. The first confrontation didn't happen under the judge's eye. It happened in the lobby of Reynolds Analytics. Samantha had never set foot inside when Michael was building it. She never carried the boxes of routers up 3 flights of stairs, never huddled with engineers over cold pizza at midnight. But now she arrived like she owned the place, heels clicking across the marble, sunglasses pushed onto her head, lawyer at her side. The receptionist froze. Mrs. Reynolds. Ex-Mrs. Reynolds, Samantha corrected, flashing a smile sharp enough to cut. "I'm here to collect some of my things." Michael appeared from the hallway before the receptionist could answer. His voice was flat. "You don't have any things here." Samantha's smile widened. "Oh, I think you'll find I do. Years of my work went into this place." Michael didn't flinch. "Name one." Her lawyer cleared his throat, stepping in. "My client doesn't need to debate with you in the lobby, Mr. Reynolds. She'll have her say in court." Michael's eyes flicked to Samantha. "Then why are you here?" That was the twist. She wasn't here for property. She was here for theater. Samantha glanced at the employees gathering nearby, their curious stares darting between her and Michael. "Because," she said loudly, "the staff should know the truth. They should know I was part of this from the start. I sacrificed everything so Michael could play CEO." Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. A junior analyst shifted uncomfortably, not sure if he should believe her. Michael stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "You sacrificed?" "Samantha, you didn't even know what the company did until after the first million came in." Her cheeks flushed, but she doubled down. "Keep lying. The court will see through you. Everyone will." Then came her slip. In her rush to grandstand, she raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Half of this is mine, whether you like it or not." "I deserve it," the words echoed in the quiet lobby. Employees exchanged uneasy looks. One of the engineers, who had been with Michael since the basement days, muttered, "That's not true." Samantha heard it. Her jaw tightened, but she forced another smile, scooped up her handbag, and stormed toward the door with her lawyer trailing behind. When the glass door shut behind her, Michael finally exhaled. His staff turned to him, waiting. He said only one thing: back to work. But inside, his resolve hardened. She wasn't just after money. She was willing to twist the truth in front of his employees, to rewrite history while looking him in the eye. The fight wasn't about divorce anymore. It was about his name, his company, his life's work. And if she wanted war, she was going to get it. The courtroom was full before the clock even struck 9. Reporters lined the back benches, laptops open, ready to spin every word into headlines. A cluster of curious onlookers squeezed into the gallery, whispering about the high-stakes divorce of the year. Michael Reynolds sat at the plaintiff's table, silent, his hands folded neatly on a stack of documents. He wore the same navy suit he had worn countless times in boardrooms, but this wasn't a pitch to investors. This was survival. Beside him sat his attorney, David Klein, calm as stone, the folder of evidence resting between them. Across the aisle, Samantha glowed under the fluorescent lights as though she were stepping onto a stage. Her attorney, sleek and fast-talking, adjusted his tie and whispered last-minute instructions. She nodded and leaned back, her posture oozing confidence. "All rise," Judge Barrett entered. The room stilled. She was known for her no-nonsense demeanor, the kind of judge who cut through excuses with a single sentence. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the case file. "Reynolds versus Reynolds," she announced. "We're here to determine claims of marital interest in Reynolds Analytics. Counsel, you may proceed." Samantha's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client sacrificed her youth and her stability to support her husband. She was there from the beginning. While Mr. Reynolds poured his time into building a company, Mrs. Reynolds held their life together. She deserves half." He motioned toward Samantha. "She will speak for herself." Samantha rose, smoothing her skirt with delicate fingers. "Nay." She stepped forward with the kind of grace that drew eyes. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed but not forced. "When Michael started Reynolds Analytics, he had nothing. No money, no reputation, just an idea. I believed in him. I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted investors in our home. I gave up my career to stand beside him. Every contract he signed, every milestone his company achieved, I was there. And now, after years of sacrifice, he wants to pretend I was just a bystander. She paused, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a tissue she had pulled from her purse. A murmur ran through the gallery. Even a few reporters leaned forward, ready to type phrases like devoted wife and emotional testimony. Michael sat perfectly still. Only his jaw muscle twitched. Samantha's attorney guided her gently. Tell the court what that sacrifice felt like. She nodded. It felt like erasing myself for him. I was the one who kept the lights on while he stayed out all night. I entertained his clients when he was too busy. I gave him the freedom to focus, and he turned that freedom into millions. That company is as much mine as his. Her voice cracked at the end, perfectly timed. Judge Barrett looked up, studying Samantha's expression. Then she turned to Michael. Mr. Reynolds, do you wish to respond now? Before Michael could speak, his attorney touched his arm. Not yet, he whispered. Michael swallowed hard and nodded. Not end! He understood. Patience. Let her dig her own hole. Samantha returned to her seat, head bowed slightly, lips trembling just enough for the cameras in the back row. Her lawyer pressed the advantage. Oh, Your Honor, the evidence may show Mr. Reynolds signed the papers, but without Mrs. Reynolds, there would be no company. We intend to prove her contribution was immeasurable, though it may not appear in cold financial records. Judge Barrett raised an eyebrow. Immeasurable? Yes, Your Honor. The unseen labor of a wife who gave up her own ambitions. Barrett tapped her pen on the desk. No! Once, twice. Proceed, proceed. But remember, this court deals in evidence, not adjectives. A flicker of doubt crossed Samantha's face, but she quickly masked it. The attorney continued, calling a witness. An old neighbor who claimed Samantha had hosted business dinners at their home. The man's testimony was shaky at best, filled with vague recollections and uncertain dates. Still, it painted Samantha as a woman constantly supporting her husband's dream. Michael quenched his jaw but said nothing. Then came the twist. A former friend of Samantha's, clearly nervous, took the stand. She testified that Samantha often complained about Michael's long hours, that she sometimes joked she married a workaholic who'd never make a dime. But under cross-examination by Samantha's attorney, the woman faltered. Maybe I misremember, but coming out bay, I asked him thus. It was years ago. She did talk about supporting him too. The gallery buzzed. The reporters typed furiously. To the untrained ear, it sounded like a tie confusion, mixed signals. But perception was tilting. Samantha looked like the wronged woman. Michael's heart pounded. His silence felt heavier by the minute. The lie was growing roots, sinking into the courtroom air. He leaned toward David. She's winning him over. David didn't blink. Let her. This isn't decided by sympathy. It's decided by proof. But Samantha wasn't done. She leaned close to her lawyer, whispered something, and then rose again. Your Honor, may I say one more thing? Barrett gave a curt nod. Samantha clasped her hands, voice soft and breaking. I stood by Michael even when he ignored me. I gave up children for him. I gave up security, and now he wants to throw me aside as if I meant nothing. I just want what is fair. I just want what I earned. A tear slid down her cheek. The gallery was silent except for the sound of her tissue rustling. Even one of the reporters wiped her own eye. Michael looked down at the folder in front of him. Articles of incorporation, payroll records, tax filings, emails, the truth, waiting. His chest ached, not just from anger but from betrayal. He remembered their wedding day, the way she whispered, I'll never leave you, in his ear. He remembered the first time she saw the office after the investors came in, her eyes lighting up not at the code or the product, but at the leather chairs in the conference room. She never wanted the grind. She only wanted the reward. Mr. Reynolds, Judge Barrett said, breaking his thoughts. You've been silent. Do you have a response? Michael opened his mouth, then stopped. He glanced at David. David stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. Oh! Your Honor, we do. He placed the thick folder on the table, sliding the first document free. The gallery leaned forward. Even Samantha straightened, her confident smile flickering for the first time. Exhibit A, David said. His voice was steady, low, but it carried across the courtroom like a drumbeat. The Articles of Incorporation for Reynolds Analytics, dated 2 years before this marriage ever took place. A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Samantha froze, her tissue still pressed to her cheek, her act unraveling by the second. Judge Barrett leaned forward. Proceed. David's hand rested on the folder, ready to release document after document, each one sharp enough to slice through every story Samantha had just told. The balance of the room shifted. Sympathy evaporated. The truth was about to speak louder than her tears. And Michael, for the first time all morning, felt the corner of his mouth twitch into the beginning of a smile. Just as Judge Barrett prepared to adjourn, Samantha's attorney slid a glossy photo across the table. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this was taken at a Reynolds Analytics investor dinner in 2016. My client organized the event. Without her efforts, those investors never would have signed." The gallery stirred. "Bites!" Samantha straightened, confidence flashing back across her face. Michael looked at the photo. A long dining table, candles, wine glasses, Samantha seated at the head with her hand lifted mid-toast. And yes, two investors who had, in fact, backed his company in the early days. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Reporters typed furiously. To the casual eye, it looked like proof. Samantha at the center of his business. But Michael knew better. That dinner wasn't an investor meeting. It was his 50th birthday. He remembered the cake shaped like the company logo, the laugh from one of his engineers who'd been invited as a joke, the way Samantha had insisted on professional photos to mark the milestone. Those two men at the table hadn't invested because of Samantha. They'd already signed contracts weeks earlier. Judge Barrett studied the picture. "We'll review this in detail at the next session. For now, it will be entered into record." Samantha smirked as she dabbed her lipstick with a napkin. "Ha!" To the room, she had just produced her first piece of evidence. Michael clenched his fists under the table. "Whoa!" He wanted to shout the truth, to tell the judge exactly what that photo was. But David touched his arm, a quiet warning. "Not yet," his lawyer whispered. "Let her hang herself with her own rope. We'll prove it later." "We'll prove it later." The gavel struck. Adjourned. Samantha swept past Michael on her way out, her perfume lingering like smoke. She leaned close enough for only him to hear. "Hope you like the picture," she murmured. "There's more where that came from." Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew the truth, and he knew the date on the back of that photograph would tell a very different story. For now, though, she had stolen the spotlight. The cameras were waiting when Michael stepped out of the courthouse. Flashes burst in his face, microphones shoved toward him like weapons. "Mr. Reynolds, do you deny your ex-wife organized investor events for your company? Is it true she gave up her career for you? Do you have proof she didn't contribute?" Michael kept walking, jaw tight. His lawyer shielded him with a firm hand. "No comment," David said sharply. But the damage was already spreading. By evening, headlines filled every news feed. "Ex-wife's photo puts Reynolds on the defensive." Gold digging or silent partner? Court yet to decide. At the office the next morning, Michael felt the weight of stares. A few employees whispered near the coffee machine. An engineer who had been at the birthday dinner years ago hesitated before approaching. "Boss, that photo she showed," the man began carefully. "People online are saying it proves she was running the show." Michael rubbed his eyes. "You were there. You know what that night was." The engineer nodded. "Yeah, but the internet doesn't care about truth, just pictures." Michael didn't answer. "Huh!" He walked into his office, closed the door, and stared at the stack of unopened evidence again. He had everything he needed, the articles of incorporation, the payroll records, even receipts from that so-called investor dinner that clearly said, "Birthday cake, custom design." But Samantha was playing a different game. She wasn't just fighting in court. She was fighting in public. That afternoon, another twist landed. An email pinged his inbox. Anonymous, no subject line, just an attachment. Michael hesitated before clicking. It was a copy of Samantha's personal diary page, scanned neatly, dated years ago. In it, she had scribbled notes like, "Investor dinner prep, keep Michael on schedule, remind him to wear blue tie." It looked damning, too damning. Michael frowned. Samantha had never kept a diary. She barely even wrote grocery lists. The handwriting was shaky, like someone trying to mimic their own style. His lawyer confirmed his suspicion later that night. "It's a plant," David said flatly. "She's manufacturing a paper trail." Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaustion creeping in. "And the court? They'll review it if she submits, which means we don't just have to defend against lies. We have to prove they're lies." Outside, Denver's skyline glowed with late evening lights. Michael looked out at it, the city where he had built everything, where Samantha was now trying to tear it down piece by piece. He picked up the photo she had submitted and flipped it over. On the back, stamped neatly, was the photographer's date, June 4th, his 50th birthday. Michael let out a slow breath. She thought she had him cornered, but she had just made her first real mistake. The second day of trial began with heavier air. The gallery was even more crowded word of the photo had spread. Judge Barrett entered, her gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight. "Counsel," she said flatly, "you may proceed with your exhibits." This was the moment Michael had waited for. His attorney, David Klein, stood and picked up the thick folder. "Your Honor, yesterday Mrs. Reynolds produced a photograph claiming it depicted her organizing an investor dinner. We'd like to submit Exhibit 14, the original print." He walked it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. "On the back," David continued, is the photographer's timestamp, June 4th. The event was not an investor dinner. It was Mr. Reynolds' 50th birthday party. We've also included the receipt for the cake, which was custom ordered for that night, clearly labeled, Happy 50th, Michael. The courtroom murmured. Reporters clicked furiously. Samantha's lawyer shot up. Damn! Objection. This is immaterial. The event still included investors. Overruled, Barrett said, eyes narrowing at Samantha. If this was his birthday, then portraying it as a business event is misleading. Samantha shifted in her chair, dabbing her lips with a tissue, pretending calm. David didn't pause. Next, Exhibit 15. Yesterday, an anonymous email surfaced, supposedly a page from Mrs. Dios&T. Reynolds' diary. He held up a scan. Your Honor, handwriting analysis confirms this was fabricated recently, and Mrs. Reynolds has admitted in deposition that she does not keep a diary. He dropped the papers back onto the table with a soft thud. Both pieces of so-called evidence collapsed under scrutiny. The shift in the room was immediate. Whoa! The sympathy Samantha had earned yesterday began to curdle. Reporters whispered to each other. Oh, forged diary, fake narrative. Samantha's attorney rose again, voice tight. Your Honor, regardless of these documents, Mrs. Estications, Reynolds' testimony still establishes her role. Who? Judge Barrett raised a hand. Testimony is one thing. Fabricated exhibits are another. I'll be weighing that heavily. Michael sat straighter for the first time in days. The tide was turning, but then came the unexpected twist. Samantha's lawyer called a new witness. A woman in her late 30s, hair tied back, a nervous frown creasing her forehead. This is Claire Jennings, the attorney announced. She worked at Reynolds Analytics during its early years. Michael stiffened. Claire had been a junior marketing associate, hired during a busy expansion phase. She hadn't lasted long. Just 8 months ago, she'd quietly left after missing sales targets and clashing with the team. He hadn't seen her since. Ms. Jennings, the lawyer said, did you ever see Mrs. Reynolds involved with the company? Claire shifted in her seat. Not formally, but I did hear discussions. Michael told me once he'd promised Samantha a payment if a contract closed. The room froze. Michael's stomach dropped. What payment? The judge asked sharply. Claire swallowed. He said if the deal went through, he'd give her $50,000 for her help convincing the client to sign. The gallery erupted with whispers. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Michael's lawyer leapt up. Objection. Out of context hearsay, but the damage was done. Samantha's lips curved into a slow smile. Judge Barrett banged her gavel. Order. We will hear the full context of the next session. Michael sat frozen. UAF. He remembered that conversation years ago, only it hadn't been what Claire thought. The $50,000 hadn't been payment for Samantha's work. It had been hush money. Samantha had embarrassed him at a dinner, nearly sabotaging the deal with careless remarks. The client had demanded reassurance, and Michael had promised Samantha he'd cover her personal debts if only she'd stay away from business dinners. But that nuance wasn't in Claire's memory, and now it sounded like Samantha had been paid for services rendered. David leaned in, whispering through clenched teeth. We'll fix this, but they just bought themselves another day in the spotlight. Michael nodded slowly, eyes locked on Samantha. She looked triumphant again, as if she'd just stolen back the advantage. The gavel struck again. Adjourned until tomorrow, Barrett said. Michael closed his eyes. Michael closed his eyes. The evidence had been strong. The truth was on his side. But one twisted memory from a disgruntled ex-employee had turned the tide again. And tomorrow, he would have to explain why he paid his ex-wife $50,000. The morning after Claire's testimony, the headlines hit harder than coffee. $50,000 promise. Right! Did Reynolds acknowledge his wife's role? Ex-wife's claim gains ground after stunning testimony. By noon, Michael's phone buzzed with messages from investors. Some were cautious, others furious. Mike, are we supposed to believe your ex was part of the business? One text read, clean this up fast. Clients are asking questions, another demanded. Even inside the office, whispers floated in the halls. A project manager muttered near the elevator, 50 grand isn't pocket change. Maybe she really was involved. Michael shut his door and buried his face in his hands. For years, he'd built this company on sweat and trust. Now, one distorted memory had everyone doubting him. That evening, he sat across from his attorney, David Klein, in the cramped law office downtown. The blinds were drawn, the fluorescent light buzzing above. Tell me everything, David said, his voice firm. I need the truth about that $50,000. Michael exhaled. It wasn't payment. It was damage control. David raised an eyebrow. She embarrassed me at a dinner with a prospective client, Michael continued. Started bragging about things she didn't understand, numbers that weren't public, projects that weren't ready. The client called me the next morning furious, threatening to walk. I panicked. I told Samantha I'd cover her debts, 50 grand, as she promised to stay away from meetings. It was a bribe to keep her quiet, not a paycheck for work. David leaned back, rubbing his temple. Whoa! So you basically paid her to disappear. Michael nodded. Exactly. That explains intent, David said slowly. But right now the court sees it as wages. We need proof it was hush money, not compensation. Michael frowned. How? David flipped open a laptop and pulled up a folder. You kept everything, remember? Old emails, invoices. Let's start there. Hours passed as they combed through Michael's digital archives. Then David stopped, scrolling back up. Here, he said. On the screen was an email dated just after that fateful dinner. From client, R. Goodman, subject. Dinner last night, Michael. I was surprised by your wife's comments. Confidential numbers should never be shared at a dinner table. If she attends future meetings, we'll reconsider the contract. David whistled. That's gold. Straight from the client. This shows she hurt the deal, not helped it. Michael felt a spark of relief. You think the judge will buy it? She won't just buy it, David said, grinning for the first time in weeks. She'll tear Samantha apart with it. He kept digging. Another document surfaced. The bank transfer for the $50,000, labeled under Samantha's personal account with the memo line, personal debt repayment. That seals it, David said, tapping the screen. No mention of salary, no contractor line, just debt payment. That's exactly what we need. Michael rubbed his temples. So we present the email and the transfer? David shook his head. Not enough. Jurors and judges don't just want paper. They want people. We need someone to say it out loud. Michael stiffened. You mean? David nodded. We call Goodman himself, the client. If he testifies that Samantha nearly cost him the deal, it's game over. Michael hesitated. You think he'll agree? It was years ago. David leaned forward, eyes sharp. He's still a client, isn't he? He has every reason to set the record straight, and something tells me he won't mind telling the court how much he hates having his time wasted. Michael stared at the glowing email on the laptop. For the first time since the trial began, he felt the ground steady beneath his feet. Samantha had thought the $50,000 made her look like a partner. But with Goodman's testimony, it could expose her as a liability. David closed the laptop with a decisive snap. I'll make the call tonight. Tomorrow, we put Goodman on that stand. Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaustion giving way to determination. He could almost see Samantha smirk, the way she'd whispered outside the courtroom. Hope you liked the picture. There's more where that came from. Well, now he had something, too. The kind of truth that didn't just whisper. It shouted. The courtroom was packed to the walls. Reporters jostled for seats, pens ready, while a low hum of whispers filled the air. Everyone knew this was it. The last day, the day Judge Barrett would close the book on Reynolds' fists. Reynolds! Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, eyes steady but jaw tight. Beside him, his attorney David Klein shuffled through a folder of neatly stacked exhibits. Across the aisle, Samantha looked polished and radiant in a cream-colored blazer, her lawyer whispering last-minute lines. She smiled faintly at the cameras in the back row, as if she were arriving for a magazine shoot instead of a legal battle. All rise, the bailiff barked. Judge Barrett entered briskly, robe swishing. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at the docket, then fixed both sides with her sharp gaze. This is the final hearing in Reynolds versus Reynolds, she said. We will resolve the matter of ownership interest in Reynolds Analytics today. Counsel, proceed. Her attorney jumped up first, projecting confidence. Your Honor, the defense maintains that Mrs. Bassest, Reynolds, was integral to the growth of Reynolds Analytics. Though her name may not appear in payroll records, her sacrifices, domestic, emotional, and social, were essential. She hosted investors, supported her husband, and even received acknowledgement of her contribution in the form of a $50,000 payment. That, Your Honor, is recognition of partnership. He gestured toward Samantha. Aye! My client will speak. Samantha rose, tissue already in hand. Her voice trembled, perfectly rehearsed. I gave up everything for Michael. I left my career to stand beside him. I opened our home to his business, entertained his clients, and believed in him when no one else did. The $50,000 payment wasn't hush money. It was appreciation. Proof he valued me. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for what I earned. She dabbed at her eyes, letting silence hang. Reporters scribbled furiously. A few members of the gallery shifted as though sympathy were pulling at them. Michael clenched his fists onto the table. We! He wanted to shout, but David's hand on his arm kept him grounded. David stood slowly. His voice was calm, almost casual. Your Honor, we respect the court's patience. But today we will cut through stories and present facts. He pulled a sheet from the folder. Exhibit A. Articles of Incorporation for Reynolds Analytics dated October 12, 2014, 2 years before the marriage. Sole founder, Michael Reynolds. He handed it to the clerk, who passed it to Barrett. She read quickly, nodding once. Aye! Exhibit B, payroll and tax filings from 2015 to 2020. No record of Samantha Reynolds employed, contracted, or compensated in any way by Reynolds Analytics. He stacked the papers neatly. So if she claims she was integral, why does not a single financial or legal record bear her name? Samantha shifted, her lips tightening. Her lawyer muttered an objection about informal contributions, but Barrett waved him down. David continued. Exhibit C. The photograph introduced last week claimed to be evidence of an investor dinner. We submit the original print with timestamp and receipt for a birthday cake ordered the same day. Happy 50th, Michael. This was not an investor event. It was a birthday party. The gallery buzzed. Reporters typed frantically. Samantha's eyes flicked nervously, her tissue trembling in her hand. And now, David said, voice sharpening. Exhibit D. An email from Robert Goodman, CEO of Goodman Logistics, dated the morning after that party. It reads, quote, I was surprised by your wife's comments. Confidential numbers should never be shared at a dinner table. If she attends future meetings, we will reconsider the contract. He handed the printout up. Barrett read, pen tapping twice. David turned to the gallery. The $50,000 payment, which Mrs. Reynolds insists was wages, was in fact a personal debt transfer labeled as such. But more importantly, it coincided directly with this email, and the man who wrote it is here today. Gasps rippled. Samantha froze. The plaintiff calls Robert Goodman. The door opened and Goodman strode in, broad and intimidating, his presence sucking the oxygen from the room. He swore the oath and sat down, glaring at Samantha as though the years hadn't softened his disdain. David approached. Mr. Goodman, did you sign a contract with Reynolds Analytics in 2019? Yes. Still a client. Did Mrs. Reynolds assist in securing that contract? Goodman barked a laugh. Assist? She nearly tanked it. She blurted out numbers she had no business saying. I told Michael if she ever showed up again, I'd walk. That 50 grand? He told me himself. It was to keep her away from business. And it worked. She never came back. The courtroom exploded with murmurs. Samantha's attorney jumped up. Objection, hearsay. Barrett's gavel cracked. Overruled. This goes to the credibility of the alleged contribution. David smiled faintly. So, to be clear, Mr. Goodman, was Samantha Reynolds an asset to your negotiations? Goodman's eyes locked on her. She was a liability. Michael saved the deal in spite of her, not because of her. The gallery gasped again. Reporters scribbled like mad. No further questions. Samantha's attorney rose for cross, sweat on his brow. Mr. Goodman, perhaps you misinterpreted her enthusiasm. Enthusiasm doesn't cost me millions, Goodman snapped. In my world, you keep your mouth shut unless you know what you're talking about. She didn't, the lawyer stammered, then finally slumped. No further questions. Samantha sat rigid, knuckles white, face pale. The tissue in her hand was shredded from nervous tearing. Judge Barrett leaned back, folding her hands. The room fell silent. Why? This case is not complicated, she began. The defense has woven stories, but stories are not evidence. What we have in evidence are corporate records predating the marriage, financial statements with no trace of Mrs. Reynolds, a photograph misrepresented to this court, and, most seriously, a fabricated diary page that attempted to deceive these proceedings. She glanced sharply at Samantha, whose lips trembled. Oh! The $50,000 payment confirmed by Mr. Kamet, Goodman, and supported by records, was never compensation. It was damage control after Mrs. Reynolds disrupted Mr. Cartast Reynolds' 50th birthday dinner in 2019, barely months after their 2018 marriage, and 5 years after Reynolds Analytics had already been founded in 2014. The company stood firmly on its own by then, and her involvement was not contributive, but destructive. Our voice hardened. This court will not reward deceit or falsehoods. Therefore, the claim to Reynolds Analytics by Mrs. Reynolds is denied in full. The company remains sole property of Michael Reynolds. The gavel struck, the sound like a gunshot. Michael exhaled, shoulders sagging as months of tension bled away. Reporters bolted from the room, shouting headlines into phones. Judge exposes, ex-wife's lies, Reynolds keeps company. $50,000 twist, backfires in court. Across the aisle, Samantha stared blankly, eyes wide, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. Fury and disbelief etched across her face. David leaned toward Michael. It's done. She's finished. Michael shook his head softly. No. The truth just started breathing again. As he stepped outside, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward him. Mr. Reynolds, how do you feel about the ruling? Will you sue your ex-wife for perjury? What message do you have for business owners in similar battles? Michael paused on the courthouse steps, his voice calm but firm. The truth always comes out, he said. And when it does, it doesn't need spin. It speaks for itself. He walked into the sunlight, free at last. Behind him, Samantha remained inside, drowning in the silence of her own lies. Michael exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The storm had passed. Reporters scrambled out of the gallery, already dialing headlines into their phones. Samantha sat frozen, her face pale, the tissue in her hand shredded into pieces. David Klein leaned toward Michael, voice low. "It's over. She can't touch you now." Michael shook his head slowly. "Oh, no, it was never about me. It was about the truth." Outside the courthouse, cameras blinded him, microphones jabbed at his chest. A dozen questions flew at once. "How do you feel? Will you sue for damages? What message do you have for others?" He paused on the steps, letting the noise settle. Then he said, calm and clear, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It waits. And when the lies fall away, it's still standing." He walked into the sunlight, free at last. Behind him, Samantha remained in the courtroom, trapped in the silence of her own deception, proof that greed can buy headlines, but it can never buy the truth.